Assembled Threads is a community manufacturing hub located in communities where there is long-term and underemployment and disadvantaged communities. This is our pilot hub, and we have recruited and employed 13 candidates from the surrounding suburbs and the Flemington estates. We only had two very simple requirements for the candidate selection: sewing experience and a passion to sew as a job. We find that a lot of community members have a barrier to a lot of workplaces because of lack of English.
I'm from Pakistan and I did course in my country, and also I did certificate 3 here, and I love sewing. I'm very passionate about this. I feel great, this is part of my life.
We have candidates from 9 different countries, none of whom have English as a first language, which means they have to actually communicate with each other in English. And the confidence in both language skill and confidence in the individuals has grown exponentially.
We are all friends now, discussing together, we're working together, sharing the work together, helping each other. It's good to have from different countries and then helping me to develop my language too.
We were like strange at the start, but now we are just like family.
Assembled Threads are providing support for people who are finding it really difficult to break into the market or to get a job. They're supporting people from public housing estates, people from our more vulnerable communities who may have the skills but haven't been able to get a job. The Council is supporting Assembled Threads a number of ways. We're supporting them through the provision of this venue. We're hoping that we can support a number of social enterprises and fledgling businesses to get a kickstart in the municipality.
We were really looking for a progressive partnership with the council. Their question to us was, what do you need? A space, we said, with a lot of natural light. Within days they came back saying, we've got a space, it's a bit quirky, what do you think? And it's brilliant.
Council's overall philosophy is local jobs for local people. I think when you create an opportunity where you build really strong partnerships between local industry, social enterprises, local government, other support services, you create an environment for amazing projects like this to happen.
Homes Glen have been an amazing partnership in this project, and their skills training was fantastic. For us at Assembled Threads, it's really important that we return to that focus on local manufacturing and supporting local artisans within our community. I think one thing that COVID has probably taught us all is that we really do need to look at self-sufficiency for the manufacturing of our products.
I just start working here and I'm learning new skills.
What work actually means for people is more than just getting a job. It's about having a future and having a sense of hope. And so that's about, all of a sudden there are possibilities around a career. It brings hope back to the broader community. The more people that are employed locally, the more people that are able to generate a future for themselves, that brings hope back to their families.
I don't have much, but I am happy to have here to work. I'm learning, working. Very good, excellent. I like to start my own business to support my family.
I think this is more exciting place and nice environment. Yeah, I'm really grateful for the community. I really want to be a fashion designer. This is my dream.
Our goal is for this to be the first hub, but the first of many hubs where we can build these magnificent teams of highly skilled individuals, passionate and engaged in what they're doing, and take on the world.
Mama's Kitchen is a program developed by the Moonee Valley City Council to achieve two goals, essentially. Is one, to assist women of predominantly East African heritage to gain experience in commercial cookery, to support them in creating their own entrepreneurial programs or goals, and also feed the community that were affected by the lockdown of the towers in Flemington and Ascot Vale during the COVID period. And we cook, package and then distribute to partners, being Wingate Avenue and the Flemington People's Pantry, and they distribute the food to the community on our behalf. What Mama's Kitchen does for the women is to build confidence in an environment that is unfamiliar.
We have a big opportunity cooking for the community. They work it from the heart, and the people, they benefit from this cooking. They deserve this good food.
I like to work with other women in a team, because I feel like we work as a one. We help each other.
All women are very kind, very helpful. I can learn from them, they can learn from me. We are working as a friends in here. I like to working with other women because they are very helpful. They are very kind, and they are very friendly.
We are providing people with confidence building experience, industry experience, and we're feeding people in need. We're providing solutions for food relief, which has hugely escalated during the COVID period.
Mama's Kitchen is a good learning place for us, because I earn a lot of experience in Mama's Kitchen. Still I am learning. I love Mama's Kitchen.
They're feeding people within their own communities. So they are seeing firsthand the response of what all their hard work and their participation and their contribution is making to the community that they live in. Mama's Kitchen also continues to support the women post the program. So whether that is in food production, business development, or even extending their training.
That's my dream. My dream come true, because I expected I learned my cooking, then I said I need a good place to work. Then really I'm happy I got this place, Mama's Kitchen, and I have an opportunity to work here. Really I am happy. I am thanks Mama's Kitchen. They gave this opportunity for me.
My favorite food is the lamb sukar, and it's a Somali dish, and it's some yummy and delicious here. I feel so creative that I knew something new, and also something nice to serve my kids. When I came back from work, they say, "Oh, what are we gonna cook now? What are you gonna prepare for us for dinner?" So they're so excited.
We've got women here that started who couldn't look another person in the eye, whose first response would be that they don't speak English. We have these people now being able to communicate, stand up tall, and be really proud of an end product. And we need to extend this experience to many more in the community. And we've been given immense support by the Moonee Valley City Council. The state government have also been hugely supportive. We've had wonderful support partners for the supply of our vehicles. At the moment, we are in a pilot program situations. We've got so many opportunities for growth. We are going to be helping develop their own businesses. We want to keep helping people.
The council keep doing this, helping the community, the ladies working here. We work here, we get a job, and doing from the heart.
More opportunity for moms to get employed in the future, and also to encourage the moms to go and apply for jobs.
From this experience, I can go outside and I can run my own business.
It's very amazing, bring happiness to us, a lot of happiness.
Meeting for the 14th of December 2021. We are very pleased here to welcome the Open Gallery to the meeting tonight, and also welcome to everyone who is streaming online. So before I begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the land on which Moonee Valley is located, that of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay this respect to any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples that may be in with us tonight. Now, councillors, I do have an apology for tonight's meeting, which is from Councillor Nation. Can I please have a motion that the apology from Councillor Nation be noted? Move Councillor Sypek, second and Councillor Bedio. All those in favour? All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 4 on the agenda is the confirmation of minutes. Councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the council meeting held on Tuesday the 30th of November please be confirmed? Move Councillor Sypek, second Councillor Tyson. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 5 on the agenda is declarations of conflict of interest. Councillors, does anyone wish to declare a conflict? Councillor Sypek. What was item 10.1, 33D? Thank you. And Councillor Sharp?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, have a conflict in 10.1, 33 Dean Street for reasons previously disclosed to the CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Would any other councillor like to declare a conflict on tonight's agenda? No, I too would like to declare a conflict of interest on item 10.1, 33 Dean Street for reasons previously disclosed to the CEO. Item 6 on the agenda is presentations. I don't believe, councillors, we have any presentations tonight. No. In that case, we will move to item 7 on the agenda, which is petition and joint letters, and I do believe that we have one tonight. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we've received a joint letter from residents along the Strand in Moonee Ponds. The letter requests Council to consider reviewing the short and long-term parking solutions to allow affected residents more easy access to parking in front of their properties. So I'd like to move that Council resolves to A, receive and note the joint letter regarding parking on the Strand, Moonee Ponds. B, refer this matter to the Director of Service Delivery for investigation and inform councillors of the outcome. And C, advise the lead joint letter organiser accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Tyson. And I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 8 on the agenda tonight is public question times, and we have received questions from the public. As we do not have the submitters of the questions in the public gallery tonight, I propose that we move to suspend the provisions in our governance rules requiring questioners to be present in the gallery. That will enable me to read the questions that have been submitted in advance and for the CEO to read the responses. Councillors, may I please have a mover that Council resolves to temporarily suspend the public question provisions in its governance rules to allow questions from the gallery to be read by the Mayor and responses read out by the CEO for this meeting. Move Councillor Sypek, seconded Councillor Hodgson. All those in favour? Is carried unanimously. Thank you. So, the first two questions come from David Mack. Thank you, David Mack, for submitting your questions. The first question is, would the Council commission a statue of Queen Elizabeth II to place in Queen's Park to celebrate 70 years as our monarch? And I'll pass that to the CEO, Helen Swee.
Thank you, David. Through the Mayor, Council considers and determines civic recognition proposals in accordance with the place naming and civic recognition policy, available for viewing on Council's website. The policy outlines the approach applied by Council in considering civic recognition proposals, who have made a significant contribution to the development, growth, and livability of Moonee Valley. An application for civic recognition can be submitted to Council for assessment against the criteria as set out under the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. David's second question reads, Why are the fountains within the lakes at Woodlands and Queen's Park not working, and when will they be fixed?
Thank you, David. Through the Mayor. The Queen's Park fountain is currently not working due to the failure of 3 pumps. Council officers are currently reviewing the options for the replacement, with repairs expected to be completed by July 2022. The Woodland Park wetland does not have a fountain. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, David, for your questions. The next 2 questions come from Steve, and Steve's first question reads, earlier this year, Council's draft budget for 2021/22 contained $500,000 each to fund detailed designs for new community sports pavilions at Maribyrnong Park and Clifton Park. In the final budget for 21/22, these 2 amounts were combined into a $1 million reserve to fund the detailed design of these and other community sports pavilions. Can the Council please advise the current status and progress of work undertaken to commence detailed design, including how much of the $1 million reserve has been spent so far in relation to the new pavilion at Maribyrnong Park? And I'll pass to the CEO, Helen Swee, for a response.
Thank you, Steve. Through the Mayor, a decision of Council is required to use the money allocated to the Pavilion Development Reserve, and it is for design and development of capital works rather than feasibility and due diligence. The organisation has been examining a variety of options to address needs for the 5 sports grounds identified in the June 2021 Council resolution to inform a future Council decision, as well as understanding projected future cash flows across the capital works portfolio. The assessment required to support asset investment is complex. With this in mind, it is anticipated officers will be preparing a Council report for February 2022 and will make recommendations relating to the Pavilion Development Reserve. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Steve's second question of Council is, the Victorian Government recently repurposed a $100,000 grant to Council to accelerate design work for the Maribyrnong Park Pavilion. What effect is this additional design funding expected to have on the shovel-ready date for the Maribyrnong Park Pavilion design? CEO, can you please respond?
Thank you, Steve. Through the Mayor, Council has not received advice from the Victorian Government relating to any repurposing of grants awarded. Council will continue to work in good faith with Sports and Recreation Victoria on this and other matters relating to government grants for sports. Thanks for your understanding and patience on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, Steve, for your questions. The next 4 questions relate to the planning application MV-179-2021 at 17 Monash Street, Ascot Vale, item 10.2 on tonight's agenda. Question 5 this evening becomes from Ben. Ben asks Council, why has the proposed development progressed to this point when it does not comply with the HO2O visibility requirements which it is subject to? The overlay states that the additions should be largely limited to the ground floor additions should be hidden from the street. The potential for a second-storey addition will be dictated by the scale, shape and ridgeline of the heritage house. Moonee Valley Guidelines 2.5.1 figures 10 and 11 show how to achieve this. Looking at the view line diagram, it is clear the proposed development does not comply and the overlay does not suggest near enough is good enough. CEO, can you please respond?
Thank you, Ben. Through the Mayor, Council's obligations under the Planning and Environment Act 1987 require Council to process all valid applications. When necessary, this requires public notification and any internal review processes required for the number of objections received as a result. In this case, a consultation meeting was held before referring the report to a Council meeting for a decision. While Council raises design concerns and seeks to resolve them prior to public notification or through the consultation meeting process, there is no obligation for the applicant to do so as long as the plans are such that Council can make a decision on the application. The Side 9 provisions of the City of Moonee Valley Heritage Guidelines are guidelines only and not a mandatory requirement that must be made in order for Council to consider the application. Further, through its recommendation, Council is able to require modifications to be made to a proposal to resolve any design concerns still outstanding at the point of making a decision, which is very typical in the planning permit process. The recommendation contained with the officer's report for this agenda item 10.2 includes conditions to ensure the design is modified to achieve the preferred view line outcome for double-story extensions contained in the heritage guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Ben's second question reads, have Council and Town Planning read the 20 objections to this proposed development given several common issues of non-compliance were raised, none of which have been rectified through the consultation or latest proposed plans tabled at the 14th of December meeting? And I'll pass to CEO Helen Swee to respond.
Thank you, Ben. Through the Mayor, all objections have been reviewed and the concerns, of which many were similar cross objections, considered against the policy relevant to decision-making for this application. A response to the content of objections is summarized in Table 3 of the Officer Report for Item 10.2 of this meeting agenda. It should also be noted that several concerns raised in objections, particularly those around amenity impacts, are not accessible under the scope of the planning permit requirements of the heritage overlay. There is also no requirement for the plans to be modified following a consultation meeting in order for Council to make a decision on an application, as the ability to require modifications through recommended permit conditions remains. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, Ben, for your questions. Question 7 this evening comes from Hayley, also relating to the planning application at 17 Monash Street, Ascot Vale. Hayley asks the Council, this pocket of Whiskey Hill is appealing to families due to the lack of high-density dwellings offered elsewhere within the area, and over 20 residents have objected to this planning application and others to retain our street heritage. Have the objections been considered in context of the impact big box extensions are having on the heritage area? Thank you, Hayley, and I'll pass the CEO for response.
Thank you, Hayley. Through the Mayor, the earlier response regarding reviews of objections applies here too. A more detailed assessment against the relevant heritage policy considerations are also contained in Section 3.4 of this report, which also touches on these points of concern. Subject to the modifications contained in the Officer's Report's recommendation, the bulk, style, and massing of the extension is considered to be consistent with the City of Moonee Valley Heritage Guidelines and is typical of numerous extensions within the Monash Street Heritage Precinct and other surrounding heritage streetscape. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Hayley's second question reads, the focus of the planning application seems to be the street frontage impact. My objection relates to the scale, bulk and size of the proposed extension from all sides and the impact of the privacy of the rear properties. The rear facade in its entirety is glass, which directly looks into Elliott Street properties. How has the bulk, scale and size of the proposal been considered with respect to the Elliott Street perspective? Thank you, CEO. If you could please respond.
Thank you, Hayley. Through the Mayor, as above, a response to this concern is contained within the relevant officer's report. The focus of the assessment against the applicable policy and consequent recommended modifications has centered around the streetscape presentation of the proposal, as this is where the Heritage Precinct Statement of Significance and the principle of the City of Moonee Valley Heritage Guidelines focus the attention. The heritage guidelines provide advice for the rare setting of additions as captured in the report before Council. The primary concern of the heritage guidelines regarding the impact to the rare of extensions is ensuring an appropriate distance is retained for a backyard scape, with no particular guidelines for the scale and massing when viewed from adjoining properties. In this regard, the rear setback and backyard scape proposed to be maintained is consistent with the proportion of backyards immediately surrounding the site and in the wider streetscape. Further, Condition 1D of the officer's report's recommendation requires that the rear eastern elevation be provided with additional articulation to break up the expanse of glazing proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, Hayley, for your questions. The final two questions for this evening come from Rosemary Mackenzie. Thank you very much, Rosemary, for submitting the questions. The first question reads, as a part of Council's open plan strategy, which is to be completed, is Council looking to create a clear delineation between open spaces, reserves, community access to nature, parks, playgrounds and sporting facilities? CEO, I would ask you to respond, please.
Thank you, Rosemary. Through the Mayor, the existing open space strategy outlines and defines the different types of open space. The strategy includes primary and secondary classification for each open space, for example, conservation or sporting categories, which have been useful in protecting and guiding the functional use of the open space. There is no intention to change these classifications in any update of the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. And Rosemary's second question is, given the Council will not achieve their tree canopy goal by 2040 at the current rate, that was in brackets, and that additional plantings will need to occur in parks/reserves in particular, how could a potential loss of canopy and space in Canning Reserve still provide sufficient green space for the community and local wildlife? CEO, if you could please respond.
Thank you, Rosemary. Through the Mayor, there is no intention to remove canopy trees at Canning Reserve at this point in time. Any future report looking into the use of Canning Reserve will consider a range of factors, including tree canopy cover and reference to the open space strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you to Rosemary and all other people who submitted questions to tonight's Council meeting. We're now on to item 9 on the agenda, which is reports from delegated committees, and I don't have any here. Council, is there any reports from delegated committees? No. In that case, we will move to item 10. Now, having declared general conflicts of interest, Councillor Sypek, Sharp and myself will exit the chamber. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, item 10.1, 33 Dean Street, Moonee Ponds, Moonee Valley Racecourse, use and development of a multi-storey building containing dwellings and offices, buildings and works in an environmental significance overlay, ESO2, and a reduction in car parking requirements. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Isa.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I'd like to move that Council resolves to defer item 10.1, 33 Dean Street, Moonee Ponds, to a future Council meeting.
Thanks, Councillor Isa. Do I have a seconder for that deferral? Thanks, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Isa, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Look, this is a very difficult situation for Council. With respect to this application, we were expecting to have some information to hand by this evening that would help us to resolve a point of contention with respect to this application. We don't have that information, unfortunately. Should we make a decision tonight on this application, we may find ourselves in an impasse that may otherwise potentially be avoidable. It's unclear, which is not ideal for any of the parties involved. I'd really prefer to try to make this process as streamlined and efficient for councillors, for council, for officers, for all parties. And in order to achieve that, some information would have really helped to make that process quite streamlined, I believe. All parties to this application are aware of some issues that have caused concern. Those are ongoing issues. A deferral in this instance would provide us with a window to receive some additional information with respect to that, and hopefully, as I say, potentially make things a little bit easier on all parties and a bit more streamlined. It's not an ideal situation. Appreciate that there may be some different views about this, but I think that this is the best way forward at this particular time. Thanks, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Isa. Councillor Hodgson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Isa. I'd like to support this deferral. I think, as Councillor Isa's indicated, my reasons for supporting deferral are around, hopefully, I think, a good governance and decision-making process, and we do that in the interests of all parties to this application. I really hope that when we next consider this item, we're able to make a stronger decision because of deferring it tonight.
Thanks, Councillor Hodgson. Any other councillors wish to speak to this motion? No? There being no dissent, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Can we please bring the Mayor back into the chamber?
Thank you. We now move to item 10.2 on the agenda, which is 17 Monash Street, Ascot Vale. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Isa.
Mayor, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation, please.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Isa, would you like to speak on the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. And from the questions received tonight, and I do thank all of the residents who've asked questions, I know that moving this motion will be potentially not welcomed by those asking the questions. And but with planning decisions, we do have to really look carefully at the planning guidelines, at the planning scheme, and look at the decision before us and try to achieve the best outcome with respect to the planning scheme and guidelines. And the reason that I'm willing to support this motion is primarily because of the extra conditions that have been added to the permit. Specifically Condition A, and Condition A requires that the first floor is modified to not encroach on the view line diagram such that that first floor extension would not be visible from the view lines that the heritage guidelines are taken from, and the diagrams in the report for people to see. Without that condition, I probably wouldn't support this application, but with the condition there, and the capacity of this extension to be modified such that it is not visible, there really isn't any, there aren't any grounds for refusing the extension with respect to the heritage guidelines. The applicant could do this in a number of ways according to that condition. They could set the first floor back a little bit further. They could slope the ceiling, reduce the ceiling height. There are a number of ways they can achieve that. The importance is the outcome, which is that the extension is not visible. Heritage is all about protecting the streetscape view, and this particular dwelling has a transverse gable roof which allows for this development to then be nestled behind it out of sight. Monash Street does have some beautiful homes. It is a lovely, relatively well intact area of detached single-storey bungalows with distinctive window and porch treatments. And this particular renovation doesn't significantly impair that or bring any detriment or overwhelm that streetscape. Look, it is really important for us as councillors to make planning decisions that on balance meet the objectives of the planning scheme. With the lighter colour, the addition of the condition around the lighter colour, I was also pleased to see that, and I think that does make a difference. And there are some other additions there that I think improve this contentious application. I know that not everyone likes the modern architecture, not everyone agrees that we should be allowing designs like this as part of the heritage renovations. It is part of our guidelines, though. We do allow renovations like this, and I do think that the right balance has been struck, and a balance that would ultimately be supportable at VCAT should an appeal be lodged. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Mayor, and I want to echo Councillor Isa's words and thanks to the residents along Monash Street. It's a beautiful street, and obviously we have some very passionate residents who are very keen to have the integrity of our heritage precincts preserved. As Councillor Isa's explained, the conditions that the planners have recommended for this application, I think, are an improved outcome and one that is supportable under the planning scheme and guidelines for our heritage overlays, particularly the view line and that development, which, you know, I know there have been other similar applications that we've seen and ones that, you know, some haven't been approved, but this one in particular is from the view line not visible and you know, from other aspects of the street also less bulky than some other applications that have come before council. I think the lighter colour, you know, we've spoken previously about how lighter colours have many advantages, one of them being, you know, the reduction of the contrast, which makes it appear less dominant, and I think that condition will also help to make that addition not compromise the integrity of the heritage property. I also think that the other conditions refer to the front fence and making sure that it's, you know, of an appropriate height. And I do believe that the landscaping at the front of the house will improve that streetscape that we are seeking to protect and preserve the integrity of. So with that all said, and acknowledging, you know, the passion and all of the many hours that residents spent sharing their views with us, we did read them all and consider them all. But at this juncture, I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Rice, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.3 on the agenda tonight is the Advocacy Strategy 2022 to 25 adoption. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Tyson.
I'll move the officer's recommendation with an additional point E.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. If you could read that out, please.
So point E, authorise officers to make minor changes to the Advocacy Strategy 22 to 25, for example, to correct spelling or grammar as required.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. And do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Adams. Councillor Tyson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. I think my additional point's pretty obvious, but the substance of the report is our advocacy for the next 4 years, essentially big to small. We've got toy libraries that obviously we work with at the moment, right up to huge public transport projects, really extending the Moonee Ponds Creek advocacy to fix that up and beautify it. There's everything in this, and I'd really recommend members of the community to look at it. I know a lot of people have had a say on it, and this is really endorsing that. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Councillor Adams. Good. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Isa.
Thanks, Mayor. This advocacy strategy is an excellent document. It's thoroughly developed, consulted on. It's a tremendous effort by officers. It sets forth our ask for funding for a headspace clinic in Flemington or Ascot Vale, cycling infrastructure, support to achieve our tree canopy and emissions reductions targets, and more, including local employment programs. And I did note that it makes some interesting statistical, includes some interesting details, like the unemployment in Flemington rose to 12.3%, in Ascot Vale to 8.2% during the pandemic. So those local employment programs to address that are important. It also importantly outlines that we must be responsive, setting out a range of tools for how we communicate our asks and seek partnerships. Page 9 also sets out how community members can get involved, which of course then relies on officers and councillors being open to and responding to that community advocacy. And the document also talks about our commitment to accountability and transparency, and indicates that an annual report card on advocacy will be produced to be clear to the community what we've achieved. So I think it's an excellent document, and I really do congratulate the officers who have worked really hard to put together this document. But it's to this point of transparency that also brings me some concern. And while I fully support the advocacy document, I've got some concerns about the way in which the recommendations worded in a couple of other sections. The points C and D seek to approve travel to Canberra for advocacy and conferences for the next 3 years in a way that I think is not in the spirit of our current councillor expenses policy, and doesn't provide the transparency and accountability that our community expects of councillors. So, Mayor, I'm just going to move an amendment, if I may.
Yes, sure.
I'll just move the amendment as circulated. Thank you. I'll move point C to read, receive a report at the earliest possible convenience, seeking approval, it should say approval for the Mayor and councillors, should they choose, to visit Canberra in 2022 prior to the next federal election to promote advocacy priorities with the members of Parliament. Point D, note the potential importance of the Mayor and councillors should they choose to travel to Canberra to participate in ALGA, and during the time also meet with relevant decision makers, including members of Parliament, senators, ministers, shadow ministers, to promote advocacy priorities. A new point E, to request the Chief Executive Officer to bring a report to Council at the earliest convenience, reviewing the travel component of the councillor expenses policy, including a consideration for the processes for reimbursement for councillor travel for advocacy purposes. Point F, note that Victorian Government advocacy should also be undertaken to progress advocacy priorities as appropriate. Thanks, Mayor.
Just one moment, Councillor Isa. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Isa. That is moved as an amendment. Do I have a seconder for the amendment?
Mayor, I'm happy to second that for the purpose of debate.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Isa, would you like to speak on your amendment?
Thank you, and I'm grateful for a colleague being willing to second for the purpose of debate. I know that not everyone around the table shares my views, and that's fine. That's that's the nature of the chamber, is that it's a contest of ideas, and the particular idea that or the particular concern and idea that I wish to just speak to now is really one of process. It's about the way that our travel, our council expenses policy works, and the way in which we seek reimbursement as councillors for expenses that we incur in our role. And the particular policy is set out under, well, under Section 41 and under Section 11 of the Local Government Act. We have to establish an expenses policy. So there has to be clear rigour and processes around the way in which we seek reimbursement. So Section 41 of the Local Government Act talks about how our policy has to specify procedures to be followed in applying for reimbursement and in reimbursing expenses, and comply with any requirements prescribed by the regulations in relation to the expenses and their reimbursement. So the policy is actually quite an important one. It's not just a high-level document that has some vague terminology. It's actually a really important part of our local government governance processes. And the procedures in there are important to the way we are accountable to our ratepayers, whose money we are using for the reimbursement of our expenses. So I have absolutely no quibble at all with people going to Canberra to seek to perform advocacy, to go to conferences. I think it's been successful in the past. It will continue to be successful. My concern is that the policy as we currently have in our suite of policies doesn't mention travel expenses for advocacy. It mentions travel expenses for conferences and seminars, specifically in a bullet point, and that our travel expenses for those need to be approved by council. The spirit in which that has been interpreted over time is that those requests have always come to council with a nominated costing, and that they have been approved. And again, that's to provide transparency and accountability. I understand that there's some difference of interpretation now. My view is that rather than reinterpret a policy that's been in place for quite some time and a process that's been in place and conventions for quite some time, that we should probably review the policy so that we can be really clear about that. If that is our new interpreted and what we would like the policy to be able to achieve, I think we just need to review the policy. The report tonight also importantly doesn't indicate any cost implications for the 3-year blanket approval of interstate travel, which again I think is not in the spirit of the policy. I don't know what cost it is to approve travel for up to 9 councillors to Canberra for the next 3 years. I did submit sort of a question to try and get a vague figure, but I haven't had a response to that, I don't think. So I just don't know. And again, the spirit of the expenses policy is that there is specific approval for those travel costs, which is not part of the report in front of us tonight and not part of what we're approving. The expenses policy specifies that it provides transparency to the municipal community. And I think the interpretation of the expenses policy that's been relied on for the officer's recommendation tonight does not provide transparency to the municipal community. The policy also states that the administration resolution of issues under this policy and procedure will reflect the highest standards of integrity and be undertaken in a manner that builds trust in councillors, delegated committee members, council and the system of local government in Victoria. Again, I don't believe that the interpretation of the policy and the way that it's been translated into the recommendation tonight does reflect the highest standards of integrity and undertaken in a manner that builds trust in councillors. Again, I reiterate that attendance at the conference, it's not about the attendance at the conference, this is about travel. And I'm not reflecting on the value of that travel to council, I'm really reflecting only on the process. My view is that it is important for us to comply with I'll just finish my sentence if I may. Comply with our expenses policy to make sure we are open, transparent and accountable about the expenses we accrue as councillors. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks, Mayor. And look, thank you, Councillor Isa. I did second this for the purpose of debate because I'm not really sure where I sit with it. I fully support the intent, as I read it, of the officer's recommendation to support this important travel for the purposes of advocacy. I understand Councillor Isa's query and suggested amendment is not actually to do with that intent. So I do understand that. I think in terms of how to resolve this as a next step, reviewing point E with reviewing the policy does sound like a good idea. If the intention from officers was to, I suppose, streamline the process of travel for advocacy, because it does, at times we all know that advocacy might need to require quite a rapid response. It might be time sensitive, and there might be a rationale to make a quick trip. So I do understand that intention, but perhaps in hearing what Councillor Isa's put forward, there is then a reason perhaps to review that policy and to make provisions for that type of occurrence. I think in the past, my memory is that the last time we approved travel to Alga, it wasn't a dollar amount in the report that came, but it was it named the councillors that would travel, so we would have a sense. I could be corrected on that, perhaps Councillor Isa in a right of reply. But I do understand the importance of being transparent for our community and making sure that those expenses, I know those expenses are reported on I believe, quarterly basis. I don't see that there's much harm in this. I don't think that there's perhaps a big onerous task on our council to bring a few additional quick reports to us to allow that transparency, but very happy to hear from other councillors if they wish to speak on this to understand better the feelings in the room. And point F, noting the Victorian Government advocacy in the context of this, highlighting the importance of advocacy on a national platform, I think is also, just good to have that note in there that we also advocate to more local levels as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would anybody else like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Bedio.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I feel the officer's recommendation is completely in line with the existing expense policy. Namely, I'm looking at page 10 under travel where it says where councillors propose to travel interstate or internationally to attend a conference or seminar, the proposal must be approved by council, which is the recommendation we have before us, is to approve travel interstate for a conference. Now, I understand Councillor Isa has a concern with the term conference, but in looking at the Webster Dictionary, the definition of a conference is a meeting of two or more persons for discussing matters of common concern. Now, for me, interpreting that, I would consider that mayors or councillors meeting with MPs to discuss business relating to council would technically be considered a conference. I'm not sure if other councillors agree with me on that. So I think that the recommendation from officers is completely in keeping with our current policy, and I think personally I feel this amendment is nitpicking to the highest degree. Our job as councillors is to deliver for our community, and in the last council term, in our most recent trip to Alga, councillors and the ex-mayor, Councillor Nation, worked really hard to advocate to our MPs, and we have delivered. I think so far we've achieved $500,000 additional funding for our Mama's Kitchen program, and that came out of direct advocacy from our trip to Canberra. So, and I'm sure there's more to come. This is a big year for us coming up with the federal election. It's important that we liaise with our MPs and that we can get the best funding and secure the most for our community. So I think it's of vital importance that we sort of open it up a little bit to make sure that councillors can attend Canberra and can work with MPs to deliver for the community.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Would any other councillor like to speak on the amendment? Any other councillor on the amendment? No. Councillor Isa, would you like to close?
Thanks, Mayor. Before the clock starts ticking down, could I just ask, in voting on this, would it be possible to vote in separate the motion?
We could split the motion. Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll just quickly respond to some of the comments made. Look, I don't think it is. I'm sorry if people think it's nitpicking. That's our job. As picked out a lot of nits from kids' hair over the years, and you know that's it is our job to be nitpicking. We have to nitpick over budgets and policies and reports, and that's our job. So, and to reiterate, it's not. I hope I've made really clear that I support the trips to Alga. I support councillors going. I do note that not all councillors were involved in the meetings with MPs, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't. If people go to Alga for the professional development, more so than the advocacy, that's okay too. It's a wonderful opportunity on both fronts. This is about the way this recommendation has a blanket approach over 3 years of expenses, rather than it coming to us as in what I believe to be the intention of our expenses policy, which is that it comes with a cost attached and comes each time there is a specific request. Businesses have to seek approval. In all businesses there are policies and processes for people to seek approval for travel before they go, for costs, fare types to all be in compliance with policy, and I'm just suggesting that we stick to processes that are more in keeping with that and are more in keeping with the way in which our policy has been enacted. City of Melbourne has an excellent policy. It sets out ways in which the Mayor can respond urgently and to requests for travel so that it doesn't need to come to Council. What I'm putting forward here is a workable solution such that it doesn't interrupt any of the plans, but I think seeks to provide some better governance for us. I think I mentioned that the report that did come to Council did have a price figure attached to it in May or June of last year. It was about $15,000 for 6 councillors to go to Canberra. I estimate that this probably is costing somewhere between 60, 70 grand. I'm not entirely sure, but I would like to know the costs before giving that type of approval, and that's what our expenses policy sets out.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. So, clause 34, where a motion contains more than one part, a councillor may request the chair to put the motion to the vote in separate parts. Now, I'm mindful that this is an amendment, and I'm happy to do this, obviously. It's going to take a while. We're going to do it one by one, because obviously we're only voting here on the individual amendments, not the overall motion. So to make it clear, because we've got it on the screen, councillors, we won't need to be taking a vote on A, because that hasn't changed with this amendment. B, I believe, does change. So B I have here, so you have split item, no, sorry, B doesn't change either. Okay, item C in the officer's recommendation, if councillors can pull their papers up, it might be easiest, and I apologise for people who are following in the gallery or online. Item C in the officer's recommendation is support the Mayor and councillors, bracket, should they choose to visit Canberra in 2022 prior to the next federal election to promote advocacy priorities with members of Parliament. And the amendment to point C is receive a report at the earliest possible convenience seeking approval for the Mayor and councillors, should they choose to visit Canberra in 2022 prior to the next federal election to promote advocacy priorities with members of Parliament. Is everyone clear on the amendment that we'll be voting on? Okay, I will put point C of that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? That is Councillor Isa, and all those against? That is Councillor Tyson, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Byrne. That point C of the amendment is lost. I will move to point D, which in the officer's recommendation, and apologies for people who are watching this, I just need to make sure that I get this right. Point D changes to note the potential. I'll read what the officer's recommendation of point D is: support the mayor and councillors, should they choose, to also travel to Canberra each year during this term of council in order to participate in the ALGA, Australian Local Government Assembly, and during this time also meet with relevant decision makers, including members of Parliament, senators, ministers and shadow ministers, to promote advocacy priorities. Victorian government advocacy should also be undertaken to progress advocacy priorities as appropriate. And D has changed to note the potential importance of the mayor and councillors, should they choose, to travel to Canberra to participate in the ALGA, Australian Local Government Assembly, and during this time also meet with relevant decision makers, including members of Parliament, senators, ministers and shadow ministers, to promote advocacy priorities. So therefore that final sentence has been cut off from the officer's recommendation, and the start to point D has also changed. Now, does everyone know what part of the amendment that we are voting on? I want to make sure people are clear, because I do understand that it's confusing. Okay, I will put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment? That is Councillor Isa, Councillor Sypek and Councillor Byrne. All those against? That is Councillor Tyson, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson. That amendment is lost. There is a new point E, is an amendment. Authorise office. No. Yes, there is a new point E, which is request the Chief Executive Officer to bring a report to Council at the earliest convenience, reviewing the travel component of the councillor expenses policy, including consideration for the processes for reimbursement for councillor travel for advocacy purposes. Is everyone clear on what that amendment is? I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is Councillor Tyson, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Isa, Councillor Byrne. All those against? That is Councillor Sharp. That amendment is carried. Point E. The next amendment is point F, which I believe is actually a part of what we read before on point D. So the original point D had in its final sentence, Victorian government advocacy should also be undertaken to progress advocacy priorities as appropriate. This has now been separated into a new
Mayor,
point.
could I seek a point of clarification? Given that D failed, I would withdraw F, but I can't without a vote to withdraw F, but it doesn't make sense to have F in, given that D failed. So maybe I could ask if I could move to withdraw that. Or you can just put it to the vote.
Well, noting that the amendment on point D has failed, therefore, councillors, if you're aware that in point D it currently says Victorian government advocacy should also be undertaken to progress advocacy priorities appropriate. That is in the substantive. There is now an amendment to also put in on top of that, note that Victorian government advocacy should also be undertaken to progress advocacy priorities as appropriate, which may have been more sense had the other one not have failed, but I will put that to the vote. So I will put to the vote that F reads, note that Victorian government advocacy should also be undertaken to progress advocacy priorities as appropriate. All those in favour? And all those in favour? No. And all those against? And that motion is carried. That motion, no, it does not carry. So obviously it goes back to point D. So the amendment does not carry. We're getting there, councillors. And that's it. And point G, right. So we have now moved through all of the amendments. Hopefully that was clear enough for people. We got there eventually. So where we are at now, we have voted on all of the amendments. Perhaps, governance, if we could please put back onto the screen what the substantive motion is, based on which amendments carried and which ones failed. So this may take a moment to do, councillors, if we can just bear with the governance team. Obviously we want to make sure that the wording is correct with all of this. For those that are viewing at home, obviously amendments can be put forward and then they can be voted in separate parts, and we just need to make sure that all councillors are following exactly what is going on, and obviously people in the chamber and people at home. And I'll make sure that once we have the full motion up on the screen, I will reread what the substantive is in whole. We might just pause. We won't adjourn because I'm sure this won't take too long.
Mayor, I know I still have 30 seconds on the clock. I could speak and fill in the time, but
now, Councillor Isa, I'm happy. I've actually got you for 50 seconds left on the clock. So, councillors, if we're okay, we might actually continue with Councillor Isa's debate whilst the screen's getting ready. Can I just have a general consensus that that's okay? And we'll make sure before we put the substantive for the vote that we have it on the screen. Councillor Isa, I've got you for 50 seconds left on your substantive.
I was just going to fill the silence, to be honest, Mayor, while that got back to where we were. Just to thank councillors for supporting that part about the reviewing the policy. To reiterate, it's to me, it's about just making sure that we have policies that reflect our intent and that can make sure that we are accountable to our constituents for the money that we incur in our endeavours to get more money for council through advocacy processes, ironically. And I think at that point we are almost back to where we are. That's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Now, on the substantive, I've had it was moved by Councillor Tyson and seconded by Councillor Adams. And Councillor Isa, you have spoken on the substantive. Would any other councillor like to speak on the substantive? Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to speak in support of the Advocacy Strategy document. I think it's a really wonderful piece of work, and I think that the community, the response and changes that we've seen since we endorsed it as a draft for consultation, that the feedback that we received from community has really strengthened the document too. I think if you do, like the priorities themselves haven't changed, but I think the way that they are presented and the evidence to support the significant need for these particular priorities in our community is really strengthened from that input that we had from the community. And I think part of that, was the consultation we had with our youth committee, but also all of the people who responded through and took the survey. It did get some really strong support, so obviously we're on the right track, and I do encourage people to, as Councillor Isa mentioned, get involved in our advocacy as we move forward. We want it to continue to reflect the things that our community needs us to work towards. I think Councillor Tyson mentioned, significant public transport, and that's one of the really significant parts, I think, of the advocacy strategy, is to have those elements in there that council is not directly responsible for delivering particular projects. The youth, the mental health headspace is one example, but community speaks to us so frequently about traffic concerns, street renewal, and in particular better public transport. We have a really strong goal to improve the health of our city and to make it a connected and encourage people to use active and sustainable transport, and we can't do that without those other higher levels of government, state and federal, investing in infrastructure in our community. So I'm really pleased to see that as a top tier priority.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? No. Councillor Isa, as the mover of an amendment, would you like to close? Councillor Tyson, as the mover of the substantive, would you like to close?
Yeah, I think, Mayor, just touching on what Councillor Isa was talking about earlier, I think I'm relatively satisfied with what we've got as the motion. I think there are the checks and balances that you are talking about in terms of the expenses report and the like, so I'm satisfied with that. I think as well what Councillor Hodgson was talking about is that another really interesting and part of this strategy is our services, which majoritively or substantially aren't funded by our level of government. They are funded by federal government, by state government. So those are absolutely critical to keep advocating for and keep pushing for, to maintain and expand that funding.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. So just to ensure that everyone knows what we're voting on, can I just get general consensus that we're clear on what's on the screen, because I know it was very confusing before. Everyone seems okay. Great. I'm happy to put it to the vote. All those in favour? That is Councillor Tyson, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Byrne. All those against? Councillor Isa. That motion is carried. Item 10.4 on the agenda tonight is the endorsement of Melbourne Water Flood Management Strategy 2021 to 2031. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Tyson.
I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Isa. Councillor Tyson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. I mean, look, we've had pestilence, we've had bushfires, we've had earthquakes, so we should absolutely be prepared for floods. I think it's really interesting going through this document that Moonee Valley is on the Flood Leadership Committee amongst several other councils, obviously all the water boards, emergency services and the like. So that is, I think, really important. And it is very important that we're on that committee because we do obviously have 3 rivers in our municipality, which are in our logo. So it is very important to prepare for it. I've seen, growing up in North Queensland, I've seen a lot of flooding, so it's really important to be prepared for. The report goes through demographic change over time, development, obviously climate change and mitigation and prevention through everything else. This report doesn't cost council anything, but it's absolutely critical that we're on the same page with Melbourne Water on this.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Councillor Isa.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Tyson. That's right. We are the waterways that surround Moonee Valley put us in a really unique situation when it comes to flooding. We are quite susceptible, and when you look at some of the mapping that's been done over the past few years, areas of our built-up environment with the impervious surfaces and the increased sort of runoff and more infill, this is a really important strategy for us. And the document that all of the partners have put together goes through planning and mitigations processes, as well as those mapping, increasing the mapping, but also looking at education and awareness and helping people to know how to respond to flooding, and as a council, how we as a council respond to flooding and our emergency management processes around that. So it's about our asset design, our asset management, and also importantly our insurance management as well. So all of these are actions and features that the Melbourne Water document goes into. It's a really interesting read for people who are, and I know there are people in the community who are quite interested in looking at some of that flood mapping. So there'll be more of that over the next few years. So yeah, thanks very much.
Apologies. Thank you, Councillor Isa. Now, would any other council... Sorry, I've lost my voice for a second. Would any other council like to speak on this motion? It's very awkward in COVID times to have a tickle in your throat. Promise I don't have COVID. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll give you a minute or two to clear your throat. I just wanted to note that, a number of the actions that are proposed in this strategy are led by Melbourne Water, DELP, and the other key partner in all of this is the Vic SES, which are a largely volunteer service. We love our local Essendon SES, and as Councillor Isa was mentioning, a lot of this is around community education and preparation for people to know what to do, where to go to. And we know that the SES are the group that we turn to when floods do happen. They are somewhat inevitable. And I just wanted to shout out to the incredible work that they do to help us prepare and recover from flood events.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Tyson, would you like to close? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Item 10.5 on the agenda tonight is the response to notices of motion 2020/07 and 2021/09, walking, cycling and child safety around schools. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Adams.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with an amendment, please.
If you'd like to read that out, please.
So A, B, C, D as is, and with an addition of point E, write to all school principals and school council presidents in the City of Moonee Valley advising of the council's active travel and road safety agenda and inviting their participation into the various initiatives. And F, note the ongoing review, evaluation and prioritisation of active travel and road safety programs with any future proposed initiatives to be referred to the annual budget process.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Adams, would you like to speak on the motion?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Council's Better Moves Around Schools program brings council and schools together to improve traffic, safety and parking management and encourage walking, cycling and the use of public transport when travelling to and from school. I'd just like to firstly acknowledge the fantastic work to date by council in this space. There's been an extraordinary amount of work done over the past 10 years assessing the traffic movements around each school in the municipality and implementing safety upgrades. I'd also like to acknowledge officers' work in producing this report. It's really clear that good outcomes in this space come from a collaborative working relationship between council, schools, school families and the wider school community. There's always going to be work needed in this space to continue to improve safety around our schools. Many of our Moonee Valley schools experience massive issues with parking and drop-off and pickups that are always congested in our built-up areas. It's so important that we have a continuous dialogue and open communication with our school and kinder leadership teams to ensure that we are on top of all issues and are able to respond innovatively and appropriately to resolve safety issues in a prompt and efficient manner. Traffic around our schools is a big issue, obviously, and we certainly need to do more in this space to encourage people to walk or cycle to school. Safety around our schools has to be a partnership between council, our educators and the school community, and anything we can do to create a safe journey to and from our kinders and schools is paramount and will help give our community the confidence to encourage more students to find ways to travel to school other than being dropped off at the front gate in a vehicle, which is just not sustainable in the long term as our municipality grows. I'm also pleased that the Better Moves Around Schools program is to be expanded and encourage that council is committed to enhancing current programs and engaging schools for better participation in council programs and initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to support this motion, and obviously originating from Councillor Adams' noticed this motion a little while ago. Anyone who has children at school, like myself and many of us around the table, know how awful it is at school pick-up and drop-off time. The Better Moves Around the School program that we have been it's been our guideline for the last 10 odd years, was a great initiative of officers all those years ago, and we've certainly made our way over that time addressing lots of different issues at lots of different schools. And for myself, I've certainly been very pleased to see the changes that we've made at schools along the way, and the improvements that have certainly helped get our kids to school safer and easier. But always happy to relook at programs, and noting that this is going to be expanded to look at kindergarten, look at it around kindergarten, so I think it's fantastic. Getting children at such a young age more aware of traffic and how to get to kinder or school safe is obviously of paramount importance, so certainly happy to support this and look forward to the next 10 years of better moves around schools for our kids.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks, Mayor. Anecdotally, I know a former advisor on active transport in the state government noted that the Moonee Valley was actually doing really great stuff in this space, and in terms of our participation in that Better Moves Around Schools program. That information's a few years old, so it's really great to see this report and see how we've continued along that path. And I think, as Councillor Sharp said, continuous improvement is always what we're striving for. So great to see that there is, more actions to be taken, really supportive of Councillor Adams' additional points there to get the school community, a gentle reminder to continue to get involved with the initiatives that we have, and to also note, whilst this closes off a couple of notices of motion, obviously the work is ongoing, and really thank you to officers for keeping that going, and thank you to the school and hopefully kindergarten communities for getting involved as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Reiser.
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, and thanks, Councillor Adams, for bringing this notice of motion earlier that's resulted in this report and feedback, and for those additional points. We all know the value of the programs in terms of to help keep kids safe and parents safe around school. Areas at drop-off and pick-up. I'm just going to be slightly cheeky here and just say something that I forgot to say in presentations related very much to schools and students, which is that because of all of these amazing programs that have been in place at schools and kept our kids safe, I did mean to say earlier to wish all of our VCE students in the Moonee Valley all the very best for Thursday for their results. They've been kept safe around our schools for 13 years, and I just wanted to let them know that we all know how hard they've worked during the pandemic, and wish them all the very best for their results on Thursday.
You're pushing it, Councillor Reiser, but I'll accept it. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? No. Councillor Adams, would you like to close? I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. It's definitely great to see us spreading the love to the kindergartens. Now, item 10.6 on the agenda is governance rules and election period policy post-consultation. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Reiser.
Move the officer's recommendation. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reiser. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Tyson. Councillor Reiser, would you like to speak on the motion?
Look, as the official nitpicker of council, it gives me great pleasure to move the new governance rules and election period policy, and to thank colleagues who have, like me, spent a lot of time working through our old rules and trying to identify things that weren't quite working, haven't quite worked perhaps as intended somewhere. Sometimes it's the wording that perhaps hasn't been as clear, and we've tried to tighten that up, and I'm really confident that our new rules do try to resolve some of the problems that we've come up against. They also introduce a few things that are a bit different, and it may take us some time to get on top of all of those differences. So we may make some mistakes in the coming meetings. We'll have to see how we go. And look, we may find things that we think are improvements, but we actually discover that they're not improvements. So obviously there are some rules that I will be interested to see how they go, particularly my favourite, that councillors will no longer be able to interrupt each other to raise points of clarification. So I look forward to seeing how that goes. Thanks to the staff who have also worked really hard on making sure that these rules have gone through some really rigorous processes, and to our governance team in particular, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Tyson.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't think there's too much more to add. Obviously, this has gone through consultation. Things have come back. My personal favourite, which does remain, is to put a motion, a closure motion, which is very useful when there's too much nitpicking going on. So I'll definitely be supporting this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Isa, would you like to close?
Mayor, I'm not going to be able to find it quickly enough but you'll know what I'm talking about, Mayor, when I say that there has been a particular rule which we've never applied properly.
Michael, we're not allowed to bring things up that haven't been in the debate, so I'm happy to pull you up on that.
No, it is the rule that Councillor Tyson is speaking of, because I'm fairly sure, although I couldn't be 100% sure, that there is a slight alteration to that rule in that previously it was meant to only be moved by someone who hadn't already spoken, and we never followed that rule. And I'm fairly confident that I double-checked and that the new rule, I think and hope, removes that, but I'll double check after the meeting so that we can make sure we either do or don't apply the rule properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. I will put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. And for everyone at home, they don't actually come into effect for tonight's council meeting, so I will continue with the current governance rules. Now, item 10.7 on the agenda is the council meeting schedule for 2022. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Bedio.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move an alternative.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio.
That council resolves to A, adopt the council meeting schedule for the 2022 calendar year, attachment 1 in brackets, with all council meetings to be inclusive of general business and planning matters, to be located at the Moonee Valley Civic Centre, 9 Callaway Avenue, Moonee Ponds, depending on COVID-19 restrictions and unless council resolves otherwise. B, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to amend the 2022 council meeting schedule as outlined in council's governance rules. C, add the 2022 council meeting schedule and any meeting date changes to council's website in accordance with the governance rules.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sypek. Councillor Bedio, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. I'll be brief with this. Essentially, the motion, the officer's recommendation is the meeting schedule for the upcoming year. Obviously, this is our last meeting for this year. An important amendment that I wanted to make was that general business and planning matters can be brought to all council meetings. So generally, we have a general business meeting, and then we have a planning meeting, and planning items generally only get brought to that once a month planning meeting. In the interest of improving the efficiency of planning determinations, I am proposing that either general business or planning can come to any council meeting, so we just go back to having an ordinary meeting of council. I'm hoping that this will, expedite planning decisions, but also general business decisions. Also, by the way, great to be back and to have a chamber as well. So hopefully that stays that way for the next foreseeable future. But yeah, that's everything. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Councillor Sypek.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I totally agree with my colleague, Councillor Bedio. This will expedite a lot of planning applications that could be waiting for the next planning meeting, whereas this gives us the ability to have it at any meeting whatsoever and to proceed with as many planning applications that are required by Council. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Bedio, would you like to close? Put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.8 on the agenda tonight is proposed amendment to alcohol restriction areas under the Activities and General Amenities Local Law 2018. Do I have a motion? Councillor Isa.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Isa, and a seconder. Councillor Bedio. Councillor Isa, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, look, this has been quite a complex area, and I think there may have been some, looking at the feedback that came back through the consultation, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about what council was actually putting forward and is resolving tonight. The situation following the 2018 local laws was such that we had a section of the municipality, primarily in Moonee and some parts of Keilor Road, where alcohol was permitted except between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m, licensed premises excluded. So, and the rest of the municipality was a no alcohol on any road or in any municipal place or parkland. So that was the situation from 2018 until tonight, if this resolution goes through. It transpired that that wasn't exactly potentially what people intended in the 2018 local law changes. And so we are undertaking, as part of the resolution in October, I think it was the 12th or so of October, we are undertaking a more wholesale review of this particular local law. I think it's 19 or 14.2, I can't quite remember. So that particular local law. But we were advised that what we could do in the interim is to extend the map that is across most of Moonee, to extend that map across the whole of the municipality, so that it is the case, if this motion goes through, that municipal places, meaning roads, parks, roads and parks is about it, really. People will be allowed to have a glass of wine in the park, but not after 9 p.m. and not before 9 a.m. So it's the same rules that have been in place across Moonee. This doesn't affect licensed premises, so liquor licences trump the local laws. So it won't affect any of the any people who have liquor licences in their, whether it's a general licence or their footpath trading or whatever licence arrangement they have for their red line. This won't affect that. So they'll still be able to proceed until 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. or whatever they have under their licence. So hopefully that's clear to people. It will need some communication. I note that point C just says publish the adopted map on Council's website. I'm not moving an amendment or anything to elaborate on that, but I do think from the feedback we received, I think it wasn't necessarily well understood what was being proposed. So I think there may need to be some really clear communications about what this means. Thanks.
Mayor, can I ask a point of clarification?
Yes, you can, Councillor Hodgson.
In the spirit of not wanting to have interrupted you, Councillor Isa, can I just clarify that the unshaded areas of the map where alcohol was not allowed, would that be with the exception of if a permit was granted?
That's right, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. I will ask that, as it is in the report, I believe there will be somebody who would be able to answer that. If I can direct that through the CEO, and we may need to have, or would you like to answer the CEO, or would you like to direct it? We may need to take an adjournment to get an answer to your point of clarification. So if you could just repeat the point of clarification so we can ensure that we can get the appropriate officer to answer.
Perhaps I could ask it through to the Speaker, even if that's acceptable to you, Mayor. So Councillor Isa mentioned that the unshaded parts of the map in the status quo indicate that in those areas, in roads and parks, no alcohol can be consumed at any time. My point of clarification is that with the exception of if a permit is granted for alcohol consumption in those areas.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Isa.
I misspoke, I'm afraid. I do have the section in front of me now. It's Local Law 4.19.2, and that says, in any land not declared by council to be an alcohol restriction area, a person must not, without a permit, on a road or in a municipal place. So I apologise that I misspoke earlier, and thank you for the point of clarification.
Thank you. I think that's all sorted. Are you happy, Councillor Hodgson? Great. Councillor Bedio, as the seconder, will move to you.
Thanks, Mayor. This was a really interesting one. It was a wording anomaly, I believe, from when it was first put a few years back. So a lot of people in the community would be aware of the signs, in particular around MPAC, that says no alcohol to be consumed between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. Technically, you're not actually meant to consume alcohol at all based on the current wording of the local laws. So if you're at Queen's Park drinking a mango seltzer, you're breaking the rules. But hopefully, if we can pass this amendment, you won't be in a few minutes. So essentially, as Councillor Isa said, we're expanding the shading on the map on our local laws so that alcohol can be consumed between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. So that our signs make sense and so that you can enjoy a wine or a beer down at Queen's Park in the lovely upcoming summer. So I hope councillors support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I could pose this as a point of clarification, but just to cover off on what Councillor Bedio was saying, Queen's Park was actually in the original shaded area, so you can between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. currently drink in Queen's Park, but perhaps we can use Woodland Park as an example. That after this map is amended, alcohol can be consumed between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. in Woodlands Park and some of our other parks that weren't already shaded in the map, just with the restriction that between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. no alcohol can be consumed in public spaces in the municipality, with the exception obviously of liquor licensed areas.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Isa, would you like to close?
Look, just to also note that I know that alcohol obviously has some concerning social impacts and health impacts, and we do know that, and I spoke about that quite a lot in October when we did move to this, and I know that some of the feedback did touch on that too. So I just wanted to add the point that we're moving to have in place across the municipality what has been in place in the bulk of Moonee, and just to reassure other people across the municipality that Moonee's been fine for the past few years, and there haven't been undue issues. So I'm fairly confident that if there are little spot fires, there are other ways of dealing with that. We've had some success with CCTV and working with the local police and the like to deal with any issues that have arisen. Our experience in Moonee has been that has not been a particular issue. We've got really responsible community. We're very fortunate, and I do hope that this proves to make things easier for everyone, more streamlined, and hopefully helps people have a festive summer.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? Is carried unanimously. We are now up to item 11 on the agenda, which is notices of motion, and we do have 5 tonight. Now, so item 11.1, I will call on Councillor Isa to present your first notice of motion, titled Notice of Motion number 2021-36, Community Engagement.
Mayor, do I need to read the motion? Is that what I need to do? I've forgotten. It's a while since I've moved notice of motion. I've forgotten. So I move that Council resolves to request the Chief Executive Officer, as part of the annual report on the Community Engagement Framework and Community Engagement Policy due in February 2022, to outline any existing and planned advisory committees and working groups or similar that provide opportunities for community members to have input towards policy development and decision making, and in brackets, e.g. the Arts and Culture Plan Engagement Working Group, close brackets, including details on how community members can participate in these groups and how deliberations are documented and shared.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Isa's motion? Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Isa.
Thanks, Mayor. Last week, I think actually, you and I were here for the Community Assembly get-together. It was nice that the Community Assembly who participated in the Council Plan, Council Vision, were able to gather here to meet in person for the first time. And it was at that meeting that, and I was in conversation with quite a few people who were asking about we talked about other opportunities for people to really get involved in contributing to Council's planning and Council's decision making, and it occurred to me that without the portfolio advisory committees, which we used to have but don't have anymore, I'm actually not clear as a councillor what working groups or advisory committees exist. And I think we have a youth committee, but I'm not sure how people get onto that or apply to be onto that. On that, I know that there was talk of an arts and culture plan engagement working group, but again, I'm not sure how to advise people about how to get onto that. And I have a feeling there are some other working groups and advisory committees that I would really like to be clear on, and it may be that we've got some gaps there, that there are opportunities for us to involve our community members in some more committees and working groups to help maintain that engagement that we saw throughout the council plan processes. Thousands of people were really engaged in that. Maybe hundreds, maybe thousands is an exaggeration, but lots anyway. And so this is about mapping what those groups and opportunities are for people, and perhaps then considering some additional opportunities if we think that might be a good idea.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Isa, for bringing this. I too have had a lot of people, more so at the beginning of our term when those working groups, portfolio working groups, were a more recent memory for people who had been a part of them, but certainly a lot of queries about how people can get involved. And I think, we all saw with the quite overwhelming response of registrations of interest for participating in the Community Assembly, and thank you to those. I'm sorry I couldn't make it on the evening to thank them in person, but in response to that, we as ward councillors all held an additional community discussion with those who hadn't been selected for the Community Assembly but were really keen to share their views and thoughts. I am really pleased to see how we might continue to capitalise on that engagement and make sure that we are setting up systems and networks and processes and opportunities for our community to be directly involved in the work that we're doing as a council, because that is, I believe, the way that we have stronger outcomes.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Isa, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 11.2 on the agenda, I call on Councillor Isa to present your second notice of motion, titled Notice of Motion number 2021-37, Flemington Pocket Park.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'm just going to move a slightly amended version, which I'm just forwarding to governance now. I apologise for not doing so earlier. I thought I had copied them in. I'll just read it while that perhaps makes its way to governance. So the motion reads that Council resolves to request the CEO to consider including in the final design of the Flemington Pocket Park the following features. A, provision of space for a future shelter of some form, possibly including natural or artistic materials, close brackets, for people waiting for the tram at the tram stop, to be developed in partnership with other agencies and stakeholders. B, provision of infrastructure to allow for future arts projects such as wall or ground tiling involving school students from local schools. And C, provision of additional garden plantings that enhance the attractiveness, colour and appeal of the park.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. We're just waiting for that to come up onto the screen.
Can I believe please ask a point of clarification, Mayor Byrne? It's changed, sorry, but this motion in our documents has changed to not be requesting a report. And from my understanding, notices of motions can't have a budgetary impact. So the way I'm reading that change is that it is going to be a budgetary impact.
Thanks, Councillor Sharp. We did get some advice on this, that it's actually just the requesting to the CEO, so there isn't actually a budgetary impact to request something to the CEO.
Okay, well that may come in handy in the future then, if that's the case.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp.
Thank you.
Now, I believe that is on the screen now and it has been sent around for councillors. Are councillors aware of the motion that's on the floor? Yep. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Rice, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. And yes, just to reiterate that I did seek some clarification of that. When I had asked for a report, and I was equally concerned that I wished only to put forward a notice of motion in line with our processes for not incurring costs. But when I put forward for a report, there was some concern that it might unduly hold things up, and whether it might be possible to word it as it is now on the screen. And I sought advice from officers to see whether there are any cost implications that needed to be considered in that, and I've circulated the advice again just now, that parts B and C don't have cost implications that are considered to be an issue, and part A, the reason that the cost implications are minimal in this instance is because really what this motion is asking for is not for the provision of structures per se, it's asking for the design to accommodate some potential future structures. So in the design, making sure that the walls or the concept design and the infrastructure that goes in allows for a future provision of a tram shelter. So at the moment in the concept design, I think there's a wall along the footpath where the tram stop is, which keeps the footpath being too narrow for any kind of tram shelter, whether it's a halogen lily pad or some kind of artistic bark structure or whatever it might be. I'm hoping not just a shell, a boring sort of shell that we see at most tram stops. But it's about this motion is about making sure that the concept design and the way that the infrastructure goes in is that it doesn't prohibit in the future some form of shelter being placed in that area. So it's not asking for that shelter to be installed, so there's no cost of that. It's asking to make sure the space remains a bit of a blank canvas for a future shelter, or doesn't have structures put there that would impede a shelter being put in the future. I hope that's clear. And second, similarly for point B, again, it's not about putting in an art project now. It's about making sure that whatever we're building the walls out of, or however we're constructing the paths, that consideration is given in that for a future arts project. So it might just be making sure that the wall is a particular size or a particular material, or that the bushes aren't butting up against the wall to allow for some kind of mural option to be placed in the future. And part C, I'm advised that is the additional plantings. The view is that is already part of the design, and if that's the case, that's wonderful. If there is a view that the design does already have sufficient garden plantings, it's perhaps not depicted in the concept designs that are online terribly well. So if part C is already accommodated, that's great.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks, Mayor. Again, thank you, Councillor Isa, for bringing this one. I'm supportive of this notice of motion because it's a very small park, and the last time we spoke about the park was with great excitement because we were putting out a request for recommendations or nominations of what we might call the park, and that that activity, I think, was really about getting buy-in from the people who are in the surrounds there, and to make sure that the community feels connected and inclined to sort of take a bit of ownership and feel like they'll want to spend time in and use the space. It being quite a small one, we want to make sure that we get the most out of it, and I think particularly Provision B, there to consider whether future arts projects might be a part of this, will also go some way to achieving that sense of connection and community ownership of whatever ends up at the Pocket Park. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Isa, would you like to close?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, just to thank all of the people who did contribute to the consultation for the Pocket Park. There was quite a lot of feedback, almost 100 responses for a small park, and quite detailed feedback. And so what this motion is doing is picking up on some of the things that came through, that I felt came through in the feedback, but I didn't feel had necessarily been picked up in the concept design. We have been waiting a long time for this park to become a park, and I know we're going to be still waiting quite some time more before the ground can be remediated, the petrol tanks removed, and we can actually start to plant some trees. So yeah, it's still a while away, but looking forward to the finished product really enhancing this little corner of Flemington.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is Councillor Tyson, Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Isa, Councillor Byrne. All those against? Councillor Sypek, Councillor Sharp. That motion is carried. 11.3, I call on Councillor Isa to present your third notice of motion, titled Notice of Motion number 2021-38, Open Space.
Thanks, Mayor. I move that Council resolves to receive a report in early 2022 on the open space plan that was initiated in 2019 but did not appear to progress from mid-2020, and that aims to protect, enhance and increase our open spaces, and that's a quote from the Your Say page. The report should also respond to item 20 in the MV 2040 action plan, Beautiful, that aimed to develop guidelines for open space in line with MV 2040 20-minute neighbourhood planning principles, and including a focus on how parks and reserves interact with broader urban issues of transport, water management, ecology, cooling, tree canopy, social infrastructure and cultural heritage.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Isa, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Hodgson. I'll return the favour when I can. So this is, thank you. This is really just that I noticed on the website that this open space plan, it's on the Your Say page, open space, and it documents the trajectory of some consultation and planning on an open space plan that seems to have just stopped in August 2020. So there was some community consultation in 2019, and it's just not clear what happened from that point. So this is really a report just asking for some clarity around that, and I imagine quite considerable officer work's gone into this. I hope it's not wasted. I really would like to see it come to fruition, and hopefully when it comes back we can progress that so that it is an update of the 2009 open space plan, which Councillor Sypek will remember. I remember Councillor Cusack moving that in 2009, many years ago, and it was a really important contribution to our auditing of our open space and our planning for open space. And so this was a revision of that, and I think it's a really important document to pursue.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Isa, once again. I think I'm really keen to see what this report will look like. I think I too was aware that the work was being done, and there are a number of things that have been brought to me by members of the community, and I think, that have been reflected in some recent community engagement that we've had. I'm just having a look at our advocacy strategy that we've just endorsed tonight, and note that the community engagement showed strongly that people were interested in more parks and open space and better use of existing open space. I know we've seen a few notices of motion come through the chamber this year about how we're using open space. One matter in particular that's been raised with me down in Moonee Ponds is the Steel Street Steps, which is a funny little section of, you might call it a pocket park, except the gradient of it is quite steep. It's obviously the steps. I think it's a former road reserve, and it sort of falls into a funny category of open space which hasn't seen a lot of love in terms of developing its usability as a place for people to sit and spend time and reflect. I think there's a lot we can do in spaces like that, and the way that we've experienced the last couple of years in living very close to home has highlighted the need for us to utilise even those very small areas to their maximum what they can offer us. So I wholeheartedly support this one and really look forward to seeing the fruits of what I'm sure is a lot of work that's been going on by officers to date, and will in the next little while.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this? Councillor Isel, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is Councillor Tyson, Councillor Adams, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Isel, Councillor Byrne. All those against? That's Councillor Sypek, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Bedio. That motion is carried. Item 11.4, I now call on Councillor Bedio to present your notice of motion titled Notice of Motion number 2021-40, Digital Signage for Sporting Clubs.
Thanks, Mayor. I do have a slight amendment, but I'll read it out in full.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio.
That Council resolves to request the CEO to provide a report to Council no later than August 31, 2022 that investigates options for digital signage to be provided for sporting clubs across the municipality. The report could be combined with the report arising from point F from minute number CM 2021/197 from 24 August 2021, and the report and must include indicative costs for purchase and installation, and whether there is scope for economies of scale. Next dot point, planning considerations in order to allow clubs to utilise the signage for advertising during training and game days, as well as fundraising opportunities for things such as movie nights. Another dot point for grant opportunities.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sypek. Councillor Bedio, would you like to speak on the item?
Yep, sure. Thanks, Mayor. So in August, obviously, over the last, for quite a while, there's been some pretty substantial debate around sports signage at sporting clubs in PPRZ and PUZ land. Currently, officers are undertaking a review, both from planning and sports and rec, around the requirements for signage for sponsorships and the like at sporting clubs. Quite a lot of sporting clubs around Australia are starting to utilise digital signage. I know some of our clubs here in Moonee Valley already have digital signage installed. I just wanted to include this. I'm sure officers would have in any case, but I just wanted to add this to as a motion so that officers know to look into this when they're investigating signage for the sports, for the report that's due to come back, and that's the report that's mentioned at point F. There's quite a few clubs that currently have digital signage in Moonee Valley are using it for some creative uses. In Walter Street Reserve, I know the Panthers use theirs for movie nights, and if we're looking for ways to support clubs for sponsorships, if we're reducing the number of signs potentially, then being able to run things like movie nights are a great way to attract additional fundraising dollars. So I'm just really putting this out so give officers a direction to look into this and to investigate whether there's any budgetary requirements that we need to consider coming into the next few budgets, or whether there's any grant opportunities that we could utilise to support clubs in rolling out these digital signage. So yeah, pretty simple one, but I just wanted to make sure that we're looking into it.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Councillor Sypek.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Over the weekend, I was inundated, and I mean literally inundated with phone calls from community groups, sporting groups, all really keen to get digital signage. And I've been talking about these signs for a long time. We've actually got 4 electronic signs out there already, and they are used in such a great form and nature. But on a lighter note, I had a couple of names that were mentioned to me, and one was called Bilbo Video, and I thought that was fine for electronic billboards. But my personal favourite one was the saviour of community signage. And thank you, Councillor Bedio, for bringing this up. I know you and me have talked about this for so many years. But what I'd like to see here also is these signs will be used for community purposes as well. So they'll have pie nights where they can have movie nights, and I think that's just a great way of utilising this kind of infrastructure. But secondly, some of our sporting facilities do have solar panels, so this will be generated by solar panels that are already there and renewable energies. What I would like to see also is to actually create some extra solar panels in conjunction with these signboards. But, and just when we were talking about advocacy before, about going to Canberra and all that, who knows? I mean, this could be something that we might get something from a state or a federal election, from either side, for Liberal or Labor. This could be an opportunity for us to, showcase this and say, hey, listen, we need some help and we need some advice here. So thank you, Councillor Bedio, for bringing this up. I think this is great. I think this will alleviate a lot of angst out there in the community, and I think if we do this right and we do it right across the city, I think we should be a shining example to other municipalities on how to rectify this signage and planning issue problems that are going to be spread all over Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Bedio, would you like to close?
I'll just add, Mayor, I've been contacted by a few people in relation to this motion, just in terms of concerns for effects on open space. I do just want to reiterate, this is just a report, so this is going to seek additional information to be included as a report or as an additional piece of information in the report that's due to come to Council by the end of August next year, in any case. And my hope is that if officers do decide that digital signage is something that we can look at that will actually support the balance between the use of open space for sporting clubs and for open space for all open space users. So really keen to see what officers come up with in this report, and I'd hope my colleagues support this.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 11.6 on the agenda, I will call on Councillor Sypek to present your notice of motion titled Notice of Motion number 2021-41, Airport Noise Overlay Grants.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Take note that at the meeting of Council, it is my intention to move that Council resolves to receive a report during 2022 that assesses the cost, benefits and mechanisms to establish a council grant program for Moonee Valley homeowners within the Melbourne Airport Environmental Overlay, the MAEO. Such a grant would support the retrofitting of double or triple glazing to the windows and doors of existing properties within the airport overlay.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. And do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Tyson. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak on the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I find it surprising that under an airport overlay that when it was changed just recently, that it took away some areas of the Rosehill ward and included other areas, which meant people who didn't have double glazing now have to sort of have double glazing to alleviate the noise of the jets coming through. So, look, there are many benefits to double glazing. Firstly, the environmental impacts, the saving on heating and cooling, the saving of greenhouse gases being reduced. I think this should actually be probably a must, maybe for new builds, but for existing builds, I think a lot of people will struggle to actually have the funds for it. So I think a grant under the Moonee Valley scheme could be a possibility to help a lot of these people who might need double glazing once air traffic starts to increase dramatically. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Tyson.
I think Councillor Sypek makes some good points. I'm used to, I've lived several suburbs under the overlay and under the flight path, but probably the most memorable was in Niddrie, where the entire house would shake every time planes went over. So that was really great, and I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? Councillor Sypek, would you like to close?
Yes, and just to add a few extra points, there's what they call an environmental upgrade finance, which allows commercial buildings to have
Councillor
double...
Sypek, you're obviously just responding to the debate in your close, not bringing up new points.
Okay, I'll just leave it at that then.
Okay. You are able to respond though? No, you're fine?
No, I'm happy to be gagged.
Just following the meeting procedures, Councillor Sypek. I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 12 on urgent business. Item 12 on the agenda is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business tonight? No? Okay, so in that case, we are moving on to confidential reports. So item 13 is confidential reports. We do have 3 to be discussed tonight. Councillors, can I have a motion that the meeting be closed to the members of the public in accordance with section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020 to allow for consideration of confidential information under the following sections related to report 13.1 H, confidential meeting information being the records of meetings closed to the public under section 66(2) A. This report is to confirm an in-principle consent position reached at a compulsory conference at the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. Related to report 13.2 A, council business information being information that would prejudice the council's position in commercial negotiations if prematurely released. This report contains sensitive commercial and confidence information which, if released prematurely could jeopardise commercial negotiations. And related to report 13.3 F, personal information being information which, if released, would result in the unreasonable disclosure of information about any person or their personal affairs. It includes information about the performance of an individual employee. Do I have a mover? Councillor Sypek. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hodgson. I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. So therefore, as we are moving into the confidential part of the meeting, I would like to say goodnight to everyone that joined us in the gallery and online tonight. I'd also like to note that tonight is the last meeting of this council this year. So I hope that everyone has a lovely holiday period and that everyone can have a well-deserved break doing whatever that is. Please enjoy yourselves, and we look to see you back early or at the end of January for our next meeting. Thank you very much and good night.